This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with Eau Claire County. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
I call to order this regular meeting of the Eau Claire County Board of Supervisors on this Tuesday, May the 7th. Supervisors, please rise for honoring the flag and a moment of reflection by Supervisor Anton, who is not here. Supervisor Anton here? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, I'm not sure what to do at this point. I thought I saw Supervisor Anton come in. Would anyone like to offer a moment of reflection?
I have a poem. Would you like a poem?
I'm sorry.
McKinney has a poem.
You want my mic on?
Go ahead. Yes.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay, this says, the magic inside of you. Do you believe in the falling star, a kiss from the sky, a last wish by the train, lips wet from the rain? Do you believe in the adventures inside of you, the curious child running free, running wildly beyond horizons, leaving rainbows in their wake? Do you believe in silent walks through the park, whispering trees, tickling your senses, calling your heart, longing to know who you are? Do you believe in the illuminated touch, an immortal moment when a heart melts into another? Can't tell one from the other, everyday magic, flirting with a stranger, sighs from a lover. Do you believe in the magic inside of you, the magic that surrounds you, whether you believe in it or not?
Thank you. Two quick announcements. First, tonight's meeting will be broadcast at Valley Media Works, Charter Channel 994 on Thursday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. following the meeting, WFRP-LP 101.9 FM, and online at valleymediaworks.org. The second announcement is this evening is a little bit different because we'll begin with our legislative session, and then when we're done with that, rather than adjourn, we will go into our discussion about the budget. We're going to handle it as if it's a report to the board, so it will be a dialogue, but we will use Robert's rules. In other words, I will ask you, if you wish to ask a question or make a comment during the presentation, to indicate your wish by pushing the button on your keypad. Please take your keypads and indicate your presence. Yes, I'm not really here. There it is. Okay. We have 25 present, 4 absent. We do have quorum. The next item is approval of the Journal of Proceedings of April 16, 2019. May I have a motion? A motion from Supervisor Leary, a second from Supervisor DeLuca. Any changes, additions, deletions, corrections? I see none. All in favor of approving the Journal of Proceedings, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed by nay. It is unanimous. Thank you. The next item is public comment, but we have no one who has signed up for public comment. We also have no reports to the county board under 2.04. We have no presentation of petitions and claims and communications. I think we're on the track for a record short meeting. Number 8, first reading of ordinances by committees. File 2.
To repeal section 3.10.030 of the code, affirmative action plan adopted by reference.
Motion. Motion by Supervisor Gatlin, second by Supervisor Henning. I'm sorry, who's speaking to this from Human Resources?
Should be first reading.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it's unanimous.
See, it's going to be an even shorter meeting if I pay attention. Yes, it's first reading. Yeah, it refers to the next meeting. We have no first reading of ordinances and resolutions by members. We have, under number 10, reports of standing committees, commissions, and boards under 2.04, and second reading of ordinances. File number 6.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Washington.
Motion? Motion by Supervisor Beckfield, second by Supervisor Anderson. Speaking to this, Supervisor Gibson? That was a tenuous question. Are you speaking to this? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
All right, we're
All
ready.
right.
Okay, this is to rezone 7 acres of land from A2 agriculture district to the RH homes to actually develop 2 single-family residences. There was a public hearing held at the town of Washington, and the town of Washington approved this. We had, this came to planning and development, and we had our hearing, and we voted to approve this, and it was also recommended for approval by Planning and Development Department.
Okay. Any other supervisor who wishes to address this? I see none. Please take your keypads and vote on file number 6. Uh, 24 yes, 1 no. The motion passes. File number 4.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Union.
Motion, Supervisor Bates, second. Supervisor Dunning. Speaking to it again, Supervisor Gibson.
Okay, this is to rezone 11.43 acres of land from A2 agriculture to District I1. There's an existing crushing and washing facility adjacent to this. And this was, they had a public hearing at the town of Union, and the town of Union approved this. We had our public hearing at Planning and Development Committee, and we voted to approve this, and it was also recommended for approval by Planning and Development.
Thank you. Is there any supervisor who wishes to speak to this? Supervisor Russell. Oops, sorry.
Well, that was for the previous one, but
I'm
I had
sorry.
a question on this.
Sorry, I've messed up the button. Supervisor DeLuca, followed by Supervisor Neiman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I read in the information that there was a recommendation. I know they built a berm on the north side with trees on top, and there was a recommendation that a berm also be built on the west side, and I was wondering if they were going to do that, if that's part of our requirement for this
Well, we can't
rezoning.
set conditions to rezoning, but they have agreed to do that, just like they did the last time when they put that other previous berm up for the acreage that was next to it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Neiman.
I had the same question, so I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Any other supervisors who wish to speak? Supervisors, please take your keypads in the hand and vote on file number 4. "25 yes, it is unanimous. Thank you very much. Next is file number 19. I'm sorry, file 107.
This ordinance makes changes to the Eau Claire County Code in zoning area.
And we have a long list of changes there. Motion, Supervisor Lavelle, second Supervisor Beckfield. Speaking to it again, I assume Supervisor Gibson and possibly Supervisor Moritz, Airport? Okay. Supervisor Gibson,
This came to planning and development, and actually this is to update so that if there's any building or expansions that has to do with height and structures near the airport and everything else, so this is basically updating the code, and I guess if Supervisor Moritz wants to add to it, he can.
That's correct.
should be on. Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you
there we
now.
go. Okay, part of this is actually, believe it or not, to make regulations less cumbersome, so that when people build property near the airport and they go through the process of the height requirement and that sort of thing, we don't have to go back to the FAA back and forth. So some of this makes it easier. This also addresses, by the way, issues that involve animals near the airport, groups of animals, like I want to build a farm with 20,000 turkeys at the end of the runway, this sort of thing. And then finally, there's just some updating of language that's involved in this, mandated by the FAA on how we describe our property and how we name it. And this is a thing I think should easily be approved. I suggest it.
Thank you. Supervisor DeLuca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. First off, they talk about hazard marking and lighting. And I guess I have a question. If you're in that landing zone area, if your homes are in that navigation easement, is there anything that you, as a normal resident, would have on your property that would bring them to your property to say you must light this or signal it that it's taller than 36 feet?
I'm not sure if I can answer that question for you, but the issue there, I think, is really that the opposite would occur, that a resident would put a very bright light on their property and confuse pilots landing. To my knowledge, that's in part the safety issues of change of language were involved in this. And so beyond that, anything 36 feet tall, I'm not well versed enough to address, but I know that there are restrictions that things should not be, of course, at a certain height within a certain portion or distance from the landing area.
I think Rod Esslinger's here from Planning Development. He may know the answer to that.
Without objection, Mr. Esslinger.
Just to address the first comment as far.
Come to a mic. Steal Supervisor Schroffnagel's mic. Here, it's on. It's on now.
Okay. So the first question as it relates to marking or lighting single-family structures, that's not intended to be part of this legislation tonight. Those are just basically we'll follow the standard protocol as far as permitting. We'll do the aviation easement. They get the permits, the building permits through the city of Eau Claire or their respective community. Other parts of this would be looking at taller structures and having those be lit where required by FAA. I don't know if that helps, where there's engineering studies that would be necessary, where the airport manager and the Federal Aviation Administration would require such.
I have a second question.
Supervisor DeLuca.
So my second question is, underneath the last one, it's about permitting for construction requirements. It says if you're going to have something, let's say I'm going to have my tree trimmed and they're going to have to put up a bucket and I'm in that landing zone area, do I have to get a permit, or does that tree company have to get a permit before they can put that bucket up to trim the tree?
So that is something that we've been working with Charity Spike Zeke with our airport commission, our airport. She's been contacting companies as far as construction companies, as far as temporary use of cranes. So what we've looked at is that we will not need a permit, provided that there's no hazard to navigation, air navigation in and around that area, but rather that the airport manager will be able to put out a notice to those pilots that are using the airport to notify that on a very temporary basis that there's going to be a crane in and around the area. You know, if it's greater than the 24-hour time period, whether it's for a commercial construction and or maintenance on the power lines in and around that area. So it's really more geared to, I think Supervisor Moritz addressed it, is to loosening or the regulations to the point of not requiring, you know, variances to a certain extent, but yet at the same time putting the pilots, those that are the airmen that are air persons that are using the airport, on notice of a tall structure that may be in the vicinity of flight patterns.
Thank you. Supervisor DeLuca?
Thank you, that answers my questions.
Thank you. I see no other lights lit. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 107. That is 25-0. It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Ordinarily, this would be the end of our meeting, and it would be a 17-minute record. However, we will now proceed to what we will technically call a report to the board, and I will call Mr. Kirk forward. The procedure here will be that Norb will be doing a presentation, but this is intended to be a dialogue. So we're not going to wait until he's done and then have questions. We're going to have question and discussion during the time. Just to maintain order, if you do have a question or a comment to make, please indicate that on your keypad and I will call on you. Thank you. I believe you have materials. Did you put materials on the desks?
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
we're just going to go through it.
We actually have a combination of items. The materials that you do have on your desk, you don't have the actual PowerPoint that Norb is going to use to walk us through the discussion, but what you do have is the document that is meant to summarize Eau Claire County programs. This is a working document that you can take notes on. We can send you an electronic version. We thought for this evening it may be easier just to have a handout that you can actually write on. We will be doing a very quick review of the various program areas that Eau Claire County government provides services in. And it is meant to be that initial overview. We will not be doing a really deep dive into any of the program areas, but you as individual supervisors are free and encouraged to talk to department heads if you have more questions. I see that we do have a number of our department heads with us this evening. They were all invited to attend if they were able to do so. And so they may, if the board chair would allow, even be part of the discussion this evening.
Yes, without objection.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity tonight to talk about the budget. And the perspective of this is, again, kind of a working session. It's a way to get us potentially, I guess, all aligned on some different ways to look at the budget, talk about some of the issues, concerns, provide a little context of where have we been historically with some of the key revenues, expenditures, talk a little bit about budget priorities, policies, kind of finish up with a overview of the calendar, and then we'll go into the mandated services that Catherine mentioned. So the first few slides kind of talk about budget perspective. So there's a lot of different ways to view a budget, and I guess I just wanted to review some of those and provide a little bit of explanation, a little bit of context, examples. So the first one is kind of tactical versus strategic. Tactical being very short-term, reactive kind of a perspective. I think a good example for us is the budgeting of out-of-county inmate housing and in many cases not backfilling positions when we have attrition just as necessary to meet the budget. Likewise, or in contrast, would be strategic, which is more of a longer-term visionary perspective. This would be often involving some type of investment. So a couple examples would be potentially investing in capital to co-locate departments to potentially facilitate cross-training and sharing of personnel. And another good example would be the replacement of the jail lighting to LED fixtures. So these again are investments that you're going to see, future returns on. Another way to look at the budget would be fixed versus variable. Fixed expenditures again aren't going to vary with whatever the outputs are. The biggest one for the county would be base wages and benefits. Doesn't really, in most cases, vary with whatever the inputs and outputs are. As opposed to variable, which would be, a good example would be overtime. And we've seen that as I report on the quarterly overtime. You see that it varies quite a bit depending on what quarter it is and what season it is and what department. So it certainly varies based on the input. Another way to look at the budget, and this is, again, a little bit different perspective, is what's controllable, what's kind of semi-controllable, or what might be uncontrollable. So I would say at a really high level, unfortunately, the county doesn't have a lot of controllable items. And I would say this kind of on both, kind of on the revenue and expenses. But as an example of some controllable items that I would see that the county would have would be license fees and things on the expenditure side like the cost of living increases. So that's certainly the board's prerogative to alter both of those, and so there is certainly a level of controllability. What falls into the semi-controllable state are things like the health insurance. And I say that that's semi-controllable because we have some ability to control what the plan structure is. So we can't always necessarily totally control the expenditure, but we can control possibly some of it based on restructuring the plan. So making the deductible higher, making the potential the employee contribution higher. There are variables that can be an impact and provide some amount of control into the budget. What's uncontrollable, unfortunately, there's again is quite a bit of the county's revenue that is really uncontrollable. When you think about the property tax levy, that's set based on the net new construction. We really have no control over that. You look at sales tax, unfortunately, we really have no control over that. It's going to be somewhat dependent on what's going on in the economic conditions. And so those are two very large sources of revenue that you'll see in a moment when we look at kind of the trended revenue, yet we have very little and almost really no control over those areas. So what are some questions potentially as you look at all these different perspectives? What are some potential questions to maybe ask as part of the budget process when you're dealing with your department heads in the committee meetings? And I would suggest these are a few that would maybe be start. So what services are mandated, and we're going to talk again about that in a little bit, and what level are we providing? What level of service is mandated and what level are we providing? How are we delivering those services? And can the delivery system be changed? Has it been changed? Are there alternative ways to deliver service? What are some of the consequences of not providing services? What are some of the downstream implications of not providing a service or a service level? Okay. And last, how are departments incorporating new things into their models? New service delivery systems, efficiencies, partnerships, et cetera, into the budget. So I think those are all questions to kind of keep in mind as you're reviewing budgets and having budget discussions during this budget process. So we talked a little bit earlier about what's controllable. So we have some obviously controllability challenges. And here's some of the ones I guess I just wanted to highlight. So again, funding is often tied to specific programs that are mandated. Okay? There's a direct linkage between the funding and the program. The funding is not necessarily linked to the actual cost of providing the service. We've certainly seen that in the 2018 preliminary numbers when I presented them, is that we related, say, alternate care and child protective services, where the cost of providing that service was far exceeding what our funding was for that service. The level that we have of public usage of the service isn't always predictable or consistent. I don't always know what level of public usage of all of our different services are going to be. And then there's some things that get into just related to kind of the county and how it relates to the structure. So the county is an arm of the state government, and so those service delivery mechanisms are sometimes limited. The county is limited to a statutory administrative home rule authority, and I will yield to Catherine on that one if you have any questions on that. And lastly, and I think this is a really important point, the county's organization was really constructed based on state statute, but it's a product of history. The way the county is structured and the departments and the way that we're interacting is really based on history and not necessarily based on strategy or efficiency.
Excuse me, Norb. Supervisor Wilkie.
Yeah, can you have Catherine explain for all board members home rule?
So one of the major differences between municipal governments, particularly city governments and county government, is that city governments can do anything that is not expressly prohibited by statute. However, county government is an arm of state government. We deliver services on behalf of the state as well as being a local legislative body, which our elected supervisors serve as the legislative body for that. And our home rule authority is only limited to our administrative operations. We can only do those types of services that are expressly authorized by state statute. And one of the examples of that is on your desk, you have an 8.5 by 11 sheet. That is one of the sheets that shows some of the outside agencies that we provide funding for. And the statutory reference that allows us to provide that funding is included so that you can see that.
Okay. So the next couple slides are going to provide a little bit of context on revenue and general fund expenditures, just to provide a little bit of where have we come from and what are we seeing is kind of trending. This first chart is just revenue. It's from 2016 through the 2019 budget. I don't know if hopefully it's clear enough that you can kind of see the difference. The top line represents the grants and aids, so you can see that by far is our largest source of revenue. You can see that we had a relatively large increase in 17. I assume that was related to when we were starting bringing on CCS and other things in DHS, but then you've seen that there is some growth there, but it's been relatively limited. The second line is the county operating tax levy. So again, what's causing that line to have any kind of slope is the net new construction, but you can see it's kind of relatively flat. The third line is sales tax. Now again, we've seen some growth in that. For the 19 budget, we budgeted relatively flat to what we saw in 18 for an actual. So, again, that has some vulnerability to whatever may happen in the economy. The next line is an important one. The next line is the light blue line. You see that one is definitely trending up, and that's the debt service tax levy. So there's two portions to the tax levy. There's the operating portion, and then there's the debt service portion, and those two together make up our total tax levy that in total is about $34 million. So I think I've talked to the board at previous time, and we've talked about financial sustainability, and one of those metrics, if you will, that we have as a metric is the relativeness of the debt service tax levy to the total tax levy. And that current limit in our policy is 30%, which we will exceed in 2019. We'll barely exceed it, but we will exceed it, and it will only continue to increase from that point forward. The last two lines are the public charges for services. You can see that's relatively flat, and then on the very bottom is the green line, which is this other taxes. And that's, to kind of put a context, that's about $750,000. So there's a very wide disparity here in terms of what some of these revenue sources are, but you can see if you look at them in total, there's not a lot of variability in some of these as you look over time.
Excuse me, Supervisor Beckfield.
Actually,
Yep.
I actually answered it in my own head, but the wheel tax wouldn't come into effect until this year.
That's
which is
right.
not on there, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And that would be in the green line.
Well, this is actually kind of taken more from kind of a general fund perspective as opposed to, that was specific to going to capital
Okay.
for road repair.
So would that affect the capitals, or would it affect?
No, these are all things that would reflect the general fund, not going into the capital or Fund 405.
Thank you.
In contrast to now, let's look at the general fund expenditures. Again, I'm kind of focusing on general fund because, as if you recall, I most recently came here and talked about what did our 2018 preliminary numbers look like. We talked about what the impact was to the unassigned general fund balance. That's the kind of relative health measure of the county. Well, this is a look at the general fund expenditures. And this is two ways to look at this. The left side of the graph kind of deals with the bars, and the right side of the graph is kind of the total of all the general fund operating expenditures. So you see, if you just look at that green line, if you go from 16 to 2019 budget, while that trend line looks fairly steep, that's about a 7.7% increase in the matter of a few years. Our net new construction, again, averages somewhere around 2.5% a year of what we've seen. Now, we had a really good year in this last year. It was greater than that. But in general rule, I think we're assuming that's about a 2% increase per year. You can see that if you look at what makes up the dark blue, the legend follows the stacking of the bars. So the very bottom is general government. You see that that's kind of relatively flat. The next piece is public safety. That has grown a little bit over time. And you could see that between general government and public safety, that takes a vast majority of what our expenditure makeup is. The third one is, it's called Health and Human Services, but it's not Health and Human Services the way we kind of think about it traditionally. It's the general fund portion, which is predominantly funding for the health department, it's child support, and it's community agencies that fall into that category. You can see that has grown a little bit. The next section is culture and recreation. That has been relatively flat over the years. There was a little bit of extra expense that occurred in 2018 that was related to a repayment that we had to do for a CDBG grant fund that was earlier, because it was housing related. It fell into that kind of category. And the last one is conservation and development. That's where the CDBG was. You'll see that bar looks a little thicker in 18. That's because we had that CDBG repayment to the state for that roughly $500,000. So I guess the picture I'm trying to paint here is, we talked a little bit about revenue. You saw that trend was relatively flat. We talked about how much controllability we have, which is kind of limited, and then we're looking at the general fund expenditures where you see we're growing. So the growth in this chart just from 18 preliminary numbers to 2019 is about 3.9%. Now 18 we're coming in a little bit under. So if you factor that in, it would be probably closer to 3% kind of growth that we had just from 18 to 19. Any questions? Okay. Okay, so the next slide, I guess if I had to think about what kind of keeps me up at night, if you will, it's this list. And this list I've labeled 2020 budget and beyond, because there's absolutely no way the county can address all these issues in 2020. The question really is, that I'd be presenting as part of this conversation and discussion, is what are those items and what should we be looking at in terms of addressing? So the first one I put on the list would be near and dear to my heart is we don't really have a strategic financial plan and a direction. Okay, I'd say in many cases we are probably more tactical. As I mentioned when I talked about budget perspectives, I think we're often left with having to be very tactical, and yet I think for us to make a difference in this process, we're going to have to start thinking of more strategic. Now we have a strategic plan, we don't have a strategic financial plan. Okay, we have pending health insurance increases. I think we've seen that in the past. I don't think we're going to see that go away as well. So we have some things that will increase. The next one is very concerning. We are continuing to bond for expenditures that I would say traditionally should be covered under operations. And yet we have some real structural needs. I've put the highway building as probably the most significant of those needs. That's a very significant need that we're going to. We're basically consuming all of our borrowing capacity, if you will, on what majority of what things would be considered operational. As I mentioned, we're on track to exceed the county debt limit, policy limit. Again, that's 30% debt service tax levy as a percentage of the overall tax levy. We certainly talked about the lack of adequate state funding for child protective services and alternate care. Again, I don't think we're going to see that dramatically necessarily change in the near future. I think the next one may be a bullet that you may or may not be aware of, but we're also experiencing competitive compensation deterioration. 85% of the county employees are now below market. And we're seeing, as a result of that, how we're getting there is market is shifting. We have limited additional revenue opportunities. As I mentioned, 2% of net new construction is about the number we would normally kind of think of and target. That's $475,000. That's about what, if you think about what we'd have for additional potential funds. Mentioned sales tax is certainly vulnerable to economic downturns. I think we've been fortunate the last few years that we've seen sales tax collections come in above what we budgeted. I think there is some concern of whether we will see that again in 19 or not and beyond. And last, we have talked about the continued erosion of the unassigned general fund balance. So this is a very heavy list, of issues facing the county, but I think they're all going to be things that we're going to have to keep in our minds as we're having budget discussions at the committee level, at the board level, with department heads, and I guess in totality, because a lot of these are going to only be solved if we're kind of working it as an overall budget.
Excuse me, Norm.
Yeah.
Supervisor Coffey.
It all just seems very bleak to me. And then you talk about strategic financial
Yep.
plan and direction.
Yeah.
So, like, what could that look like? I mean, we're not going to have bake sales, right? I mean, what are we going to do? How do we, if we don't have money and we're not getting money from the state and we have to follow what the state is telling us that we need to do, it feels like somebody just pulled your arm up your back and said, okay, now fix it. And like, I just don't really know where the path is out.
Well, go ahead, you can start with that one.
There's necessarily one answer to that. I think that there are many answers to that. In any number of our different department areas, they are taking a very strategic approach in changing the way that they serve different clients and looking at opportunities for serving differently that change and will begin to change not only the numbers of individuals looking for service, whether it be in human services or those who would be affected by the criminal justice system or part of that criminal justice system. And so looking at those innovative programmings that can start to change some of those trajectories is a very important part of that. The other piece of that is how do we continue as a local government to provide service in different ways so that we can still provide the service
but at a lower cost potentially. And then part of that, and there's going to be a slide coming up that's going to talk a little bit about how we do that and the ways that we, at least for Eau Claire County, are going to have those conversations. In a recent issue of Public Manager magazine, it's put out by the International City County Managers Association, Rebecca Ryan, who is an individual that we worked with here in Eau Claire County with the City of Altoona and the City of Eau Claire, talked about the need for local governments to find ways to leverage assets together. And so that applies not only for local government units, but even within our own organization. And looking at, instead of looking at things from a departmental standpoint, looking at them from a system standpoint. So I think there are opportunities. That does not mean that we will not have to make difficult choices, because we will. And we will have to continue to have the other part of the conversation, which is with the state of Wisconsin, regarding what we as a local government are and are not able to do. So that's also a key there.
Thank you. Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you. Just also in response, in terms of the mandate, it's really up to the county to the extent to which they fulfill the mandate. So some counties are more exuberant than others. So something that Eau Claire County would find alarming, Milwaukee County might say, that's not a big deal. So we see a lot of that especially some of the smaller counties that don't have resources, you see a lot of differences in terms of how they handle some of their programming. So there's that to consider.
Thank you. Thank you. Supervisor Wilkie.
Yeah, Nora, I'd appreciate a little bit more comment and dialogue on, so we're all on the same page, the last item, continued erosion of the unassigned general fund balance. Can you speak to us on how is that happening, and is it happening, and what are the possible short and long-term consequences of that erosion?
Well, yeah, I think I have showed charts in the past, and yeah, it has occurred over the last few years, and you know, unfortunately, that has been related to some of the deficits that we've seen in DHS and covering those. I guess probably the next potential ramification of that would probably impact our bond fund, our bond rating. I would say the bond rating, when they look and they do their assessment, unassigned general fund balance is one of the components, and they look at what's going on in terms of activity. So that's a potential ramification.
What about the long-term consequences if we stay on our current path?
Well, I suppose if you stayed on that long-term path, you definitely would probably get to bankruptcy at some point.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I'm not trying to say that we're on that path, but I think it's something to be aware of. You know, we're talking about that general unassigned fund balance of being, you know, roughly in the 10 million-ish, you know, kind of range. That's not a lot when you look at the size of our county, right? You know, if you look at what our general fund expenditures are, you know, that's, and you're using a general rule of thumb, you know, that's about covering about 3 months, if you will.
And we did 2 million plus in 2018, and we're not sure what's going to happen to 2019.
Yeah, in 2018, just also to be clear, 2018 isn't closed yet. So DHS revenue stays open until the end of June. So they just received a couple $100,000 not that long ago. So there's always still potential, but it's still going to be an impact of, I would guess, at least 2 million, if not, you know, slightly above that.
Okay, thank you.
One thing that I think the board should be
Aware of as well is that we're doing some work with some joint committees around that topic, looking at and taking a little bit deeper dive into the topic and identifying a number of performance measures, as well as looking at the services that we're providing and how those services are changing, and then identifying some strategies for moving forward. So I wouldn't want the board to walk away from this evening saying, well, we know this is out there and we're not having conversations around that. We are having conversations around that and seeking to find those identified strategies and solutions and share them and gain that common understanding.
Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have always been concerned about that which we can't predict. Mm-hmm. And even in the possibility of changing those elements to something different, there is an element of risk. Just came back from a conference over at Elkhart Lake, which was really 2 days of looking at our foster care system and trying to figure out if there's a different way to do business. And we believe that there really is, and certainly have made some efforts in this county to begin that change. However, like with all things, change does not happen rapidly. It happens gradually over a period of time. So what will you be looking for that would be an indicator of a change that was showing some promise of success?
If you're asking me as it relates to DHS, I'd be looking at what that profile looks like for alternate care versus what we budgeted. And how are we progressing against that, and are we seeing that trend line change, if you will, right?
And so would you be looking also to see whether or not a change would make a difference in another department's budget, purely because of what's happening in that particular
Sure, I think that's a piece we have to consider, is that there may be cost avoidance that occurs in other areas of the county because of services provided in DHS, whether it be the jail or in other areas. There is a lot of interaction that occurs in crosses departments, right? So I think that is an important aspect to think about, is it's not necessarily just one department, that there is interaction, and there could be cost avoidance that occurs in one area by an investment or a cost in another. I'm not sure if that's what you were referring
and that's what I was wanting to be pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't just look at it in a vacuum. You do have to look at it in totality to what the impact is.
Thank you.
Supervisor Cronk.
I just wanted to add to that briefly, just the conversation, because I know DHS kind of keeps coming up and has with our budget as long as I've been here, which is not that long. However, I have to say that with that change in thinking, Supervisor Bates was talking about the alternate care, the foster care. As that change occurs, I mean, first you have to make the decision, just the actual decision that what you're doing is expensive and it perhaps isn't working. And so when we look at other departments, I think the challenge is to look at our return on investment and what are we actually getting as, a community from the investments that we're making. What is that return on what we're spending? So I think that's important to look at all areas.
Supervisor Bates again.
I'd just like to add one other thing, and that is that basically the change that may occur in developing a matrix to help us to understand how that change is occurring, I think is something that we need to share with the board as we go along. But obviously, we're not the only county facing this. This is a critical issue, and not only other counties, but certainly in other states throughout the country. Mm-hmm. So bringing the public along with us, I think, is another matter.
Yep. Okay, now we're going to shift a little bit, now that we've kind of had the bad news. Let's talk a little bit about budget policies and priorities. So the next few pages, I'm not going to go through word for word, maybe just concentrate on some of the bolded words. So these are policies that were established and have presumably been presented to the board before. They're not new. I think they've been used in past budget cycles, so this is really just kind of a refresher, if you will, of what those policies were. First one talks about focusing and providing necessary services. The second bullet, the key there is financial reserves, financial and institutional stability. So we've had those discussions about financial sustainability. Third one recognizes that we have programs that respond to social needs. So it is about people. It is about what we're doing to provide services to people. And the last one talks about that we do have to be, consciously consider reducing the level of services when there is a reduction or an impact related to the state or federal funding. Okay. A few more. The first one talks about programs and services that, if it's possible, to hold costs down elsewhere. Transition of the budget should be smooth, honest, and with long-term plans. I think we always try to go into it thinking that it's going to be smooth and honest and transparent, and so I view this as just an extension of that, of having this time to be able to talk to the entire board of prepping for the budget. The last one, or the last two, is physical assets should be properly and timely maintained. I think that's an area that you will see us try to focus more on. I think it's an area that we haven't spent enough time on, quite honestly, from what I've seen, and it is something that we need to pay attention to. We do have a tremendous amount of physical assets that the company, or excuse me, the county owns, and we need to make sure that they're all here, adequately maintained, and that we can track them. And then last, of course, we have to align the budget with their strategic plan, and I think we do that as best we can. Again, I don't see that we have a financial strategic plan or direction. So I think I'll yield this next slide.
Thank you. The next slide has just a few points, and these are points that we're going to be utilizing when we have conversations, meaning when administration has conversations with department heads. So in the slide that you'll see coming up here, before the budget gets to the administrator and before we start the work with individual departments, they have already met with oversight committees to talk about policy direction, strategic direction that lines up with the policy that is being recommended by that oversight committee. And so as part of that, they'll be coming forward with their recommendation. And we're hoping that the oversight committees will also be asking some of these questions and looking at it from the standpoint, the two priorities. One talks about the cross-sectional analysis of our county operations, and all that means is that we're constantly looking at our overall structure, and can we find ways to align the overall system to get either a better outcome or the same level of service, but without as much input, meaning can we do it with either less personnel or less cost? The second one is the proactive relationship to retain our financial flexibility. And what we really mean there is each one of our departmental areas. I think in the past, we oftentimes approach the budget from the standpoint of the actual need. And so one of the conversations that we're going to have with departments is about that end product of, and actually it goes back to Supervisor Cronk's statement earlier, and that this could probably even be restated, return on investment, because the services should have alignment with the money that is placed into that service area. And so we're going to have that as part of the discussion. We're also going to talk about service levels and what is considered to be essential, what's core, meaning we absolutely need that from the standpoint of meeting some of those mandates. And then I know that there are many departments that provide some services that the public finds desirable, but we as an organization may have to make the decision that we will no longer provide those even though they're desirable and desired by the constituency and the citizens that we serve. And so I think that to Supervisor Wilkie's point, he mentioned earlier that this budget year will be a tough one. I believe it will be, and I believe that we're going to have to ask some of these difficult questions as an organization and find answers together. That's all.
Okay. I don't know if you want to talk to this slide or.
Actually, this is simply a summary in a more visual form of the overall budget calendar. The Finance and Budget Committee met last night and finalized the budget calendar. And so this is just a very visual version of that. The areas I'd like to draw your attention to are the meetings in May and June, and the department heads will be coming to you requesting that the agenda include a discussion about their performance management. We've met with each of the departments and talked about their performance management, what the numbers tell us, how they assist you as policymakers in making your decisions, and how they help our management staff. And so they've been doing some significant work on making changes to those, and the intent of the discussion is, what do you as policymakers need to see in order to track where trends are taking you and how programs are delivering service? So, yes, sir.
Supervisor Leary.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, will these reports and slides be put on the Report Central? Because I think it's really good information, particularly with the updated budget calendar. And the other thing is, we've been talking a lot about, as policymakers and as staff, but have you considered any way that we might judge some of the citizens and taxpayers, their input, and so they can help us kind of winnow and define just the end results? Because I'm very concerned that as representatives, we need to get their input, particularly if we're looking at some major changes.
Agreed, and you make a very good point. And actually the last two, and we will put all of this on Report Central, we'll make sure we get this information out there, but the last two rows on this slide speak to some of the key areas that oversight committees work in. And one of them is in looking at what we're calling the steep trends. Those are the trends that are societal, technological, economic, environmental, and political that actually affect the services that we, the county, are providing. And looking at what is, because we don't operate in a vacuum, we are responding to what is happening in our community. And so that becomes part of that ongoing dialogue every month as you do your work in your oversight committee. Along with that, the last one is the budget monitoring, and that again is part of the work that is done throughout the year by oversight committees. And so we've been working on improving the tools that we have in Report Central so that you have not only financials, but you also have some narrative to go with that to provide context. And so we're hoping that those tools will improve and give you what you need as a policymaker to fulfill your role. And I agree with you, Supervisor Leary, that really looking at the impacts to the people we serve is very important.
The other point I wanted to just mention is the WCA website. I hope particularly our new supervisors have become familiar with that, because they have a new section particularly called Analytical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. We're not alone in Eau Claire County.
No.
We're not in a vacuum in terms of the workforce and being appealing and how we're competing. So take heart, we're not alone, but that doesn't mean we can't be a leader as we have in the past in finding some solutions. So hopefully we can put our thinking hats on. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is a lot of times people, they don't understand some of the problems, so we also need to communicate with our constituents. These are some of the things we're seeing, and also ask some of our constituents, do you have suggestions how we might approach things differently? Get their input. So that's all.
Thank you.
I guess I'd also just like to add, if I could, just a plug for Report Central. If you haven't been out to that site yet, I would encourage you to do so. What is out there now is departmental financial reports and narratives that will be out there every quarter. There's also a section on countywide reports, so you'll be able to get a flavor of how did the first quarter financials look from a county perspective. Kind of overall, there's a number of looks. One's overall, there's some program definitions that you'll see, and we'll start, that cadence of getting those out there on a regular basis with some narratives to support that.
I think Ray Henning Ray, I think, had a, Supervisor Henning?
Excuse me, Supervisor Henning.
I really appreciate the amount of time and work that you put into this PowerPoint. I think it's an insult for us to sit here and know that all the work you've gone through to do this for something we can't even read. Now, there's got to be something that can make this, so when you look at this chart, that we can see what you're talking about. I mean, I think Report Central is great, but when we're sitting here trying to absorb what you're talking about, and you're referring to a chart we can't read, I think is an insult. There's got to be some way that we can get something on that wall that we can read.
Supervisor Wilkie.
Stronger said than I would say, but yeah, I think in the future maybe a little larger, especially for folks like me. But I had the advantage being on budget and finance, having seen this chart and readable, so I can't complain. A couple of comments that I wanted to share, and I think it's timely having the dates up there and whatnot. And I appreciate Supervisor Leary's comments about the need to continue to strive to try to get public input, be it through the survey, public hearing, or whatnot. That's one extremely important element in our budgeting process. A second one that I intend to personally pay more attention to, because I think we kind of paid attention to it, but we really need to pay closer attention to it, is what the governing committee does in their budget. We're going to try to make sure that's clear in our documents so that we know what you recommended. To be honest with you, in the past, it really hasn't been real clear always, or jump out at us. So I'm going to make every effort to look closely, but in my effort, I hope that the governing committee will do the tough work too. That's the other part of it. I haven't heard it recently in this board, which is pleasing, but sometimes there's those comments, well, let's just be the nice guy and we'll rubber stamp it, and budget and finance will take care of it anyway. They'll do this tough stuff. I've actually heard that in past times in words. I'm asking you, I'm going to pay real close attention to what you say as a governing committee as one of the things of priorities, because it is going to be a tough budget time. And of course, we look at the administrator's recommendation and, quite frankly, work off that. It's not going to end up being the administrator's budget. It will end up being budget and finance's proposed budget, and I stress proposed to you, because we will then submit it to the committee of the whole here, where you have a shot at deciding what you want to do with that budget. And technically, then when it gets on our board agenda on the same night, you could actually have motions then. I will say I will continue to ask that the Chair of Budget and Finance in each section share with you any high points that we think you ought to be aware of, kind of like a bell, an alarm. And I also think it's important that I've appreciated it when chairs of governing committees have got up and drawn things to our attention. I like that procedure that we added next time, and I'm going to lobby our chair that we do that again. Thank you.
This section is the mandates.
And so then what we were going to do very briefly, because there's a lot of information here, is just very quickly walk through the sheets that you have that are the mandate sheets. And so what we did is we took all of the different program areas that the county provides service in. We put them on the sheet, and they're organized. There are 7 different buckets that the state of Wisconsin uses for organizing expenditures so that they're consistent across all of 72 counties. And so we put all of the different departmental areas into those buckets because that's where the community of interest lies. And from there, we identify which department the actual program areas are in, and then a brief description of the service or program, is it mandated, and then some mandate detail. So just a few notes on some of these things. So the first one, your first page, it's conservation and economic development is the first bucket. That's the first functional bucket. And in that you have parks and forest, and you have the county forest management. And so if you look over, that's the forest properties that we, the county, maintain. And it says mandated, and the answer there is yes, but it's mandated because of a decision that the county board made a number of years ago to enroll forest properties in the county forest program through Chapter 77 in state statutes. And so at this time, you have actually Section 28.11 then that governs the overall management of that forest property. And so that was a decision that was made many years ago to maintain and actually actively manage that asset. And I think that is one of the assets that has actually done very, very well for Eau Claire County. When you look at the recreational opportunities and the overall forest management and the revenue that the timber sales have brought to this county, it has been extremely beneficial. The next department area is planning and development, and we do have Rod Esslinger here this evening. So as the chair noted earlier, because if no one has any objection to it, perhaps Rod may even be able to answer questions. But you'll notice that there are a number of different areas listed below, and the areas are the service and program, a very quick description, and then it tells you whether or not they're mandated. And you will note that the majority of the services that are provided within planning and development are mandated services because they establish actual land records, and that is through the real property listing, as well as the geographic information system, which is actually digitizing those records, and then creating layers of information so that it's accessible to the general public. Survey and land records is validating the land records and ensuring accuracy. Land and water conservation, that group right now is the group that is working on the project of the concentrated animal feeding operations and updating the county ordinance to accommodate the will of the board in that area and how they want to actually manage those types of operations in Eau Claire County. They also protect the natural resources, water, land, soil, in the county by working with local landowners. Code administration for both land use and building. Part of it is the land use in our rural areas in the county. The other part of it is the agreement where we actually provide that building code management for other jurisdictions within the county. And then the planning, and that is the comprehensive plan is an example of that, the comprehensive land use plan, which is mandated by the state that all counties have a comprehensive land use plan. That's a very quick overview, and I don't know, Rod or the chair of the committee, if anyone else would like to speak to some of those program areas. Briefly? I don't want to be the only one
Come
speaking.
forward to, I'm sure Supervisor Schroffnagel will permit you to use. Oh, never mind. Okay.
So again, thank you. My name is Rod Esslinger, Director of Planning and Development. So as Administrator Schaaf reviewed with you, the program areas, some of which you see routinely, especially as far as the planning activities, you see that work come in front of you pretty much every committee meeting. These are program areas that within the planning and development, about 18 employees kind of oversee certain parts of these program areas. We cover a wide brush. It's a wide area that we cover, from planning to land conservation programs, building and land use, shoreland, floodplain. So, there's the mandated programs that are here, the statutes that are listed out. It is important. Economic development does hinge closely upon the activities that we do within our department. I think it's important to note that we are working with our partners, our local town partners, to make sure activities are done in a way that it supports the development and protects the environment. Obviously, that's part of what we do as well, and obviously partnering with all of you on an elected basis as well. So,
Sounds good.
Are there any questions or?
There is one area that is located, although the service is located in planning and development, because we put these in functional budgets. Emergency management, which is part of planning and development, is actually under public safety. So that's one of the distinctions I would make, is that we utilized the overall buckets that the state of Wisconsin uses for organizing these.
And then the other thing that's going to be important that you'll start to see, as Norb explained, the quarterly reports, my budget and planning and development's budget in specific will start to align better with the county budget as a whole as far as reporting. We have right now a lot of our program areas do cross over a little bit because staff crosses over areas, but we're going to align our programs much to what you see here, and so we can report that out in accord with the chart of accounts. It'll be better for quarterly reporting, and then just aligning our budget with the county budget as well. So as Administrator Schaaf indicated, emergency management, Tyler Esch is that person. He gave you an update, annual update not too long ago. Really, that's about preparedness and being ready in the event that there is an event or a natural disaster. For that matter, it's not even a disaster that we could be called to assistance. The Eau Claire Marathon, Tyler was working alongside our city partners and actually was called to task where there was a lot of activity that was happening along the marathon, and he became a pretty important player in as far as connecting resources during the race. So I think it's important. Again, we do a wide variety. We don't have a lot of staff. We have basically a specialist for each program area that we cover. So I think I've said enough.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone, I don't know.
There's no one.
No one? Okay. The next section then, actually after conservation and economic development, is general government. That includes all of what I would say the back of the house services. These are the services that are necessary in order to manage an organization of this size. The first being administration, that is our county administration services, and risk management and insurance. We have Frank Draxler with us this evening, who manages all of the risk management and insurance programs for the county, as well as safety. And has also been working cross-sectionally with many of these other departments to actually create some of that cross-functional activity that we want to see. And so I don't know, Frank, would you like to share some information with the...
Do you want to come all the way forward, Frank?
Well, I don't have anything prepared, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
If there are any, yeah.
There is none.
None? Okay.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Corporation Counsel, This is Timothy Sullivan's first meeting as Corporation Counsel. And his team actually provides legal services in a number of areas. Not only do they provide the services to the board, but they also serve as a liaison and a resource for all of our department managers. And they actually manage significant caseloads in the areas of child protective services, termination of parental rights, Chapter 51 protective placements. Am I missing anything?
Mental commitments are Chapter 51.
Yes.
Guardianships and protective
Thank you.
placements would be 54, 55.
Thank you.
Zoning ordinance violations, municipal code violations. So we kind of spread all over the place.
But a very vital portion of our government. The county clerk, you see the county clerk at all of your meetings. She and her team are the primary, I would say, record keeper for the Board of Supervisors. And that is a statutory role. She's an elected official. She works with tax deeds, marriage licenses, elections administration, and then that is in addition to the county board duties. Janet, would you like to share anything additional, or does anyone have questions for Janet about her programming? Nope. Facilities, that is Matt Tyson. He was unable to be here this evening. His team provides all of the facilities management for our courthouse, our jail, our communication towers, and has also begun working with our Parks and Highway Department and our more remote locations to actually provide services to those entities as well, and has begun to look at and be part of the PACE program, as well as Green Tier Legacy Community work. And so what the PACE is the way in which we, the county, are able to provide through ordinance funding to other agencies, and Jim Dunning is also a representative in that. That is not a mandate, neither is the Green Tier Legacy, and looking for sustainable solutions to our buildings. That is not mandated, but it is a key function of the work they do. The next in our general government is our human resources. Actually, I think we missed a heading here because we have accounts. Pardon? Finance. Of course, you heard tonight a very significant piece of the work that the Finance Committee provides to the board, keeping track of accounts, internal controls. Their actual activities are mandated for our organization, and those mandates are actually listed on the sheet, and that would include accounts payable, payroll, anything related to our finances is part of what the finance department does. Human resources is also a part of the backbone services. They work on our recruitment and selection processes, the management and classification of our employees, maintaining the appropriate classifications for the number and type of employees we have is extremely important from a liability perspective. And they also work on different support and development activities that, although they are not mandated, they are very important to the overall well-being of our organization. A recent example of that is a new onboarding process that they are preparing for us that is specific to retaining employees when they come in. They identified that as an area of concern. Information systems, even though those are not mandated services, they provide all of the technological resources that we, the county, need to operate. And technology is no longer optional, and we are making the transition to much more mobile technology. Where we used to use desktops, we now use either laptops or mobile electronic devices such as smartphones. It has significantly improved our overall efficiency as a local government. And there are many strategic investments that we, the county, have made in this area in order to develop some of the systems that we need in order to increase effectiveness and efficiency. I think that you'll see more and more of those. We're seeing more of those become relevant as specific softwares are being developed that utilize artificial intelligence that make our jobs easier. And there are any number of different examples of that. Are there any questions on any of these programs that any of you would like to speak to or talk about? Yes.
I'm just curious about Orchard Cemetery. Where is that?
That is where the former nursing home used to be, and we maintain that property into perpetuity. I can get you.
Dove Healthcare is located.
Yes.
One on the west.
Right, Dove Healthcare on the west side.
Oh, by Dove.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. General government, Register of Deeds is included in the general government. That is statutorily set. Cappy Christensen is here this evening as well. She is the Register of Deeds. She handles all of the real estate and vital records. And the surety, ensuring that those records are appropriately handled, and also keeps, I think one of the key things here is that keeps those records so that they cannot be misused for either identity theft or for real estate fraud. So very important function of county government, and that feeds directly into the state records. Yes?
I have a question regarding Register of Deeds.
You want to come up, Gabby?
It would help if you would push your button, so I know that you wish to speak, Supervisor McKinney.
You want me to push a button?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Then I know that you wish to speak. Thank you.
You're going to be sorry I'm up here. Okay, who's got a question?
Here.
Supervisor McKinney.
Okay.
I know we raised the cost of getting a marriage license, I think to $95.
That's Janet's office.
Right,
That's
but
county
then
clerk,
when the filing happens, it goes to Register of Deeds. And is there a cost then for that, and what does that cost?
That's $20, and that's
Okay.
set by statute.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mhm. Is that it? Real estate?
Supervisor
No.
Beckfield, did you? Okay. I think that's it. No one else. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay, thank you.
You're off the hook.
Okay. The treasurer is also part of general government, another elected official. They maintain the tax rolls for the county and also provide treasury management. Glenda has also willingly served on a number of different functional groups, work groups. One that met last night with finance and budget was in relation to overall county investments. Glenda works with Norb and the administrator, myself, and from that team approach has actually gotten us some significant return on some of the investments. So health and social services, that is the entire bucket. You can see that the Aging and Disability Resource Center is the first one that is listed here. Linda Struck is the Aging and Disability Resources Director, and she is here this evening over in the back here. They actually do some significant work in information counseling and nutrition work for the elderly and the disabled. They provide transportation services, prevention and health promotion, outreach and public education, and public long-term care programs. The program that you are probably most familiar with is in nutrition, and that's probably the Meals on Wheels, because we've had that discussion and the program delivery of that before this board a number of times, as they've looked for strategic ways of providing meals. So I don't know if there are any questions in that area.
Oh,
Supervisor Bates.
Oh, sorry. A little slow to catch up there. Thank you. Supervisor Bates.
Yes, Lynn, I think before we always had sort of a roadmap showing us the number of individuals that come in to ADRC that really are just citizens looking for information. And I'm hoping that's something that we'll continue to have access to. That they're not people that are in trouble, so to speak. They're individuals just looking for solutions to sometimes housing, sometimes health insurance. And I didn't see it the last time around.
It should be in our performance.
Why don't you come forward to Supervisor Buchanan's microphone? Right there. It's on.
Touch button. Those numbers are in our performance management data and should be in the annual report. I don't know them offhand, but it's in the thousands and thousands because one of our primary responsibilities in the scope of services is to provide information and assistance and resources to Eau Claire County citizens. So I can get that to you, Colleen, or?
Well, I'm thinking more so having it available to the public because I think they have no idea the number of individuals we serve.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Child support is part of health and social services, and their purpose is to ensure that the children in the county have the financial needs from the parents that they need, and they are mandated in their service, and we are paid 2/3 of the cost of the service by the state of Wisconsin to actually provide that. So only 1/3 of the cost of providing child support comes from tax levy. The next one is the Department of Human Services. All of the activities in the Department of Human Services are mandated, and actually the mandate detail was significantly whittled down because every program area has very specific statutory language as to the population being served, and in many cases, it is very regulated as to the type of service that is being provided as well. And so the care that they are providing goes to abused and neglected children, treatment for adults and children with behavioral issues, community care and treatment of children who are developmentally disabled, residential and community care and treatment of youth. That was actually part of the merging of the work that we do in our juvenile justice along with our human services, because they actually have many of the back-end services in human services that are needed by the juveniles who actually would interact through that system. The residential and community care and treatment of youth, protection of vulnerable adults that are at risk for abuse and neglect, and then financial and economic assistance, and along with that, the fraud investigation. So it's quite an array of different services, and actually each one of these service areas has sub-programs beneath that that are broken out in the budget documents if you want to begin digging deeper into those different areas of service. Discussion? Questions? Diane Cable, the Director of Human Services, is here this evening as well.
I see no light. Oh, sorry. Supervisor Bates.
And the one thing I didn't see here is the connection that Human Services has in funding the treatment courts.
The treatment courts are on here, but they're actually listed under judicial. So it's the bucket, it's where that functional bucket is. So you see that many departments cross some of those functional areas.
Right, I wanted to point that out.
Thank you. The city and county jointly fund a public health entity, and that is the next department that you see listed. And many of the services provided in public health are also mandated. And you can see them listed: healthy homes and places, safe food and water, growth and development, communicable disease, chronic disease prevention, healthy living and prevention, And as you'll note, the majority of the work that they do is on prevention program, is specifically aligned with health outcomes for the community. The veterans are also a part of the Health and Social Services, and they not only provide direct one-on-one service to veterans, but they do significant work in outreach, public education, and advocacy in the community. And Eric Killen was unable to be here this evening. Judicial, you have the circuit courts, and we have the circuit court judges as well as tri-mediation. The judges, of course, in the running of the municipal court is done by the county on behalf of the state of Wisconsin. This is another area where the funding is not adequate to cover the cost of service. And so there is a significant amount of tax levy that is placed in this program as well because of a lack of funding from the state. Tri-mediation is not a mandated program, but it is one of the program areas that is preventative in nature and actually provides relief to the courts by mediating potential cases before they become problematic. And then you see as well under judicial the Department of Human Services and the treatment courts, as well as the Criminal Justice Collaboration Council, which has the overall systems look and systems work that they do within the criminal justice system, and they run the Community Transition Center. Clerk of Courts, which is there to actually serve the courts in providing all of the management of court records, financial collections, and support for the courts. The district attorney, self-explanatory, the prosecutorial arm of our organization. The district attorney is an elected official and a state employee. The different program areas are listed there. They also run the victim witness program for the county, which is statutory as well and mandated. Register and probate, they actually provide support to the circuit courts, and they work on the administration of estates for the courts. And they also maintain the juvenile records, which are held confidentially and must be held separately from those that are part of the clerk of courts. Questions or comment or more detail that anyone would like? The next area is leisure and education. And Beaver Creek Reserve, the county owns the property. It is run by the Friends of Beaver Creek. We also provide funding through county levy for the library system and for Parks and Forest in the form of recreation as well as the Expo Center. In Parks and Forest, we are not mandated to have recreational opportunities. However, one of the key indicators of the places where people want to live include very robust park systems with many amenities. And there, I actually see we have the state-funded snowmobile and ATV trails, and that's actually how a portion of the forest is actually used for recreational activities. The University Extension, which we should probably take that UW off of there, Extension, and Catherine Emanuel, who is the Area Extension Director, is here this evening as well. But you will also see that in Extension, they provide education to our community as a whole in the areas of agriculture, natural resources, horticulture, human development and relationships, 4-H and youth development, as well as food-wise. And you'll note that none of those programs are actually mandated. However, they are programming that is highly desirable because it helps in developing community assets that would otherwise not actually have the resources to be developed. And I don't know if there are any questions about that programming, or I know there are any number of folks here in the room that can speak to that as well. Nobody want? Okay.
Oh, sorry, we do have Supervisor Pagonis.
Sorry, this is a small thing, but
Mm-hmm.
mediation is mandatory. It's this is incorrect. Small
Oh,
claims mediation
okay.
is not, but mediation is mandatory pursuant to 767.0, .405 sub 3. A county, mediation shall be provided in every county of the state.
Thank you for pointing that out.
It's a small thing, but it's.
But it's very important. Thank you for
When said
pointing
it
that
wasn't-
out.
It took me a while to have the words be absorbed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the extension area, I'm wondering whether or not, since we are on a contract now with the university, whether the committee will have the opportunity to review that contract, since there are going to be some changes coming up in that contract. It's not listed here as a contract, and I'm wondering whether or not that will happen.
I don't know that there are changes in the contract from the prior year, other than the identification of the different areas. We can talk about that after this meeting. Let's do that, because.
Is that a question that Ms. Emanuel can?
Well, I think that what I will do is follow up with Supervisor Bates, please.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Public safety is our communication center. That is the 911. It is mandated. It is the point of service for the entire county, and we actually share that function with the city of Eau Claire as well. The Department of Human Services and the Juvenile Detention Center is listed in the public safety area. Medical examiner, it's actually by contract through Dunn County, and that is a mandated service. There are some choices that the county makes as it pertains to having a medical examiner or a coroner. Eau Claire County has chosen to utilize a medical examiner. Planning and development, the emergency management that we mentioned before is part of public safety, as is the sheriff and his response to crime and community caretaking. And then he also has a number of different other program areas that they run through the sheriff's department, the SWAT, or the Special Weapons and Tactics. Their statutory detention of inmates, that is our secure jail, that is mandated. And you'll see that the Huber, although not mandated, is also an option that the county has chosen to provide to inmates. We have the circuit court and courthouse security that is provided by the sheriff's department. They provide the civil process and foreclosure sales, and that is a mandated service. And then the investigations in the detective branch of the sheriff's department, as well as the West Central Drug Task Force. So although those are not specifically mandated, they are a key function of the law enforcement and public safety work that the sheriff does. And I don't think we have anyone from the sheriff's office here this evening. They also provide traffic control and enforcement, and those who live in the rural areas know that that is a highly valued service that the sheriff's department provides. The airport, under Transportation and Public Works, has a number of not only general aviation, but they also provide commercial aviation out of that location. That is for the Chippewa Valley. We actually share that with Chippewa County. And then we have Highway and Transportation and Public Works as well. John Johnson is here this evening. And we have the regular county road maintenance, highway and bridge construction, and the work that we as a local government do to collaborate with the state and local government partners and provide service on behalf of those partners. You'll see that all of those areas are mandated, as well as the equipment fleet operations. They manage their entire fleet. The planning and development then under Public Works, solid waste management is actually the recycling program that is run in the planning and development department. And that is mandated as well. And then we provided for you as well under various, the community agencies with their statutory reference that shows that we are able to participate in funding for those agencies. That is all I have.
Did you want to
if we could go through it, does
No.
anyone want to go through the list of community agencies at this time?
I don't see any consensus on
No.
that, so that's at the conclusion of it.
That is all we have this evening, yes.
This is the conclusion of our report section. This is also the end of our business, and therefore we are adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and Eau Claire County. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.